you.
That means they can hear you.
That's right. Oh, right.
Greetings and welcome everyone to the American Teilhard Association's annual event being held this year in 2021 through the magic of Zoom. And it highlights our interconnectivity in the noosphere and our interdependence as we encounter the emergence of the Omega Point. My name is Andrew Del Rossi. I will be your MC today. And I would like to begin with a special thanks to Kathleen Deignan for her wonderful and beautiful artistic and musical portrayal of some shots of Teilhard's life as we welcome everyone into the space today. I'll begin by going over some brief house rules as we gather using the technology of Zoom, and then I'll explain the day's structure. We will keep our participants muted for the majority of today's gathering, though I encourage you to use the reactions button in the bottom if you wish to express any sort of emoticon, and as well as the chat function should you have any questions or comments that you would like to make. This will be especially helpful when we get to our Q&A portion of the program today. Today's event will begin as I introduce our president, Sister Kathleen Duffy, who will then introduce our keynote speaker, followed by a question and answer session. We'll take a brief break, and then we'll conclude our day with 3 shorter presentations. So at this time, I would like to introduce Sister Kathleen Duffy, PhD, who is a Sister of St. Joseph, Professor Emerita at Chestnut Hill College, Director of the Institute of Religion and Science, and we are so grateful to have her as our President of the American Teilhard Association. Everyone, please welcome Kathy Duffy.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon to all of you. And a warm, very warm welcome to the annual event of the American Teilhard Association, our yearly opportunity to join together to celebrate the life and thought of Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and to be inspired by his hope for the future. It is touching to see so many of our members, as well as friends from our partner organizations, with us today. You are also very welcome. And we are also so grateful to those who have donated so generously to make this day a possibility. A sincere thanks to you. The American Teilhard Association was established in 1967 at a time when enthusiasm for Teilhard's ideas was at its peak. Throughout the years, the association has continued its mission to explore, to educate, and to apply Teilhard's thought to the problems that beset our church and our world. Since during the pandemic, in-person gatherings have proved impossible, we have been providing online events and programs with the added advantage of reaching folks from all over the world. Today, for instance, participants are coming from countries such as Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the Netherlands, France, England, and Mexico, among others, as well as from every corner of the United States. Thanks to our online technology, it will be a noosphere day, and we plan to continue in this direction in the coming years. But as we celebrate this chance to be together, we are also mindful of the many critical situations in our world that keep us from becoming one. Racism, wars, poverty, environmental degradation, to name just a few. Yet it was this kind of world that Teilhard was attempting to reimagine. In our day, probably more than any other, we can learn from Teilhard's approach to struggle, from his courage in the face of resistance, from his creativity when there seemed no hope, and from his determination to promote greater consciousness within the human species. So we are grateful to our members who inspire us with interest in moving the work of this great man into the future. And to those of you who are not yet members of the American Teilhard Association, I highly recommend your joining us. Details can be found on our website, and information about that you will find in the chat. Our members receive paper copies of Teilhard studies and access to online copies of Teilhard Perspective. Both are produced twice a year, and announcements of our online and in-person events, including the annual meeting. Our full events will soon be posted on our website and sent by email to our members. We invite you to connect with us and with each other through Facebook and Instagram. Again, see the details on the chat. We have designed a wonderful program for you today. Cynthia Bourgeault brings many years of mystical practice and deep grounding in the work of consciousness to her reflections on Teilhard's experience of Christ as person, and will share with us how this impacted Teilhard's understanding of evolutionary process and draws us with hope into the future. We are also featuring 3 authors who have recently published on Teilhard. Lou Savory on the phenomenon of man, Marie Béon de la Tour's, Teilhard's grandniece, on Teilhard and the feminine, and Marie-Joseph Conchon on Teilhard's cousin, Marguerite Teilhard Champon. We hope that you will find this program both intellectually stimulating and truly inspirational. Thank you so much for being with us today. And now I would like to introduce our main speaker for the day, Cynthia Bourgeault. Cynthia is a modern-day mystic, an Episcopal priest, an author, and an internationally known retreat leader. As a core member at the Center for Action and Contemplation and founding director of an international network of wisdom schools, Cynthia interacts with a global network of students and practitioners. But she also wisely guards time for precious solitude at her seaside hermitage in Maine. The range of Cynthia's signature contributions to the Christian contemplative reawakening is broad and is evident in the titles of just a few of her numerous books. Love is Stronger Than Death, The Heart of Centering Prayer, The Wisdom Jesus, and The Eye of the Heart. You can learn more about Cynthia by going to her website, cynthiabourgeault.org, which again will appear on the chat. Now, please join me in welcoming Cynthia to our annual meeting and to the American Teilhard Association. Cynthia.
Well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you to the American Teilhard Society Association. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be addressing you on this beautiful, beautiful sunny day in Maine when I would otherwise just be wasting time sailing. So I wanted to share some thoughts with you today about Teilhard's profound and compelling vision of personhood. But I want to do so against the broader backdrop of contemporary interspiritual dialogue and the integral evolutionary movement. Two things in which he had some prominent role as a kind of founding patriarch, and where I've been part of the conversation pit for the better part of 2 decades. I want to reflect more generally on what Teilhard's vision of personhood still has to bring to the evolutionary conversation today, particularly as it tends to play out in these more secular and spiritual but not religious formats of our own time. Is there a uniquely Christian and Western way of understanding what would nowadays be called the highest states of conscious realization? I believe there is, and that Teilhard's vision of personhood still holds the functional key to it. So please bear with me in my initial remarks if they seem to circle a bit. I need to put a few pieces on the table and to sketch in a bit of the backstory, which may not be familiar to all of you. A few names and connecting links that you may not have heard of. Hang in with this part if you can, because I believe there's something larger at stake here, which if we can grasp it directly, not only in and of itself broadens the horizons of Teilhardian study, but brings a wider appreciation and understanding of Teilhard's extraordinary contribution to the greater Western spiritual tradition, in which his work is profoundly anchored. So I think it gives us leverage to see his contribution in an even wider and more, if you might call it, universal light. So as you all know, the last section of Teilhard's magnum opus, The Human Phenomenon, is called Superlife. It's a brave and precocious attempt to sketch out what contemporary evolutionary theory would nowadays call a new plateau or stage of consciousness, often referred to in these contemporary roadmaps as third tier or non-dual. For Teilhard, its hallmarks are that, first of all, that it's collective, and second, that it's personal. Here we celebrate the debut of the ultra-human, as he calls it, a whole new depth and diaphany emerging in human consciousness, which properly ushers in the sphere of the person and marks the final convergence on the omega point. Paradoxically, perhaps, but consistent with Teilhard's guiding principle that unity differentiates, this final convergence is in the order of an intensification and not a dissolving. This is the way the world will end. This is the way the world will end, says T.S. Eliot, not with a bang, but with a whimper. But with Teilhard, it's neither a bang nor a whimper, but a paroxysm of harmonized complexity. I love that phrase, page 186 in Human Phenomenon, that the world will end in a paroxysm of harmonized complexity, not all the little bits and pieces atomized, dissolved, reduced to a single oneness, but each glowing brightly like the individual pieces in a stained glass window, illuminated by a single transparent and revealing diaphanous light. So toward the end of his life, it's no secret to Teilhardians that Teilhard experienced himself painfully as a voice crying in the wilderness. Can I truly be the only one to have seen this? He anguishes in his final essay, The Christic, completed less than a month before his death. But then he answers his own question and rises up in himself with a triumphant, no, I'm not a freak. Truth has only to appear once in a single human being for it to be impossible for anything ever to prevent it from spreading universally and setting the whole world ablaze. One of the most triumphant statements of the human, faith in the human condition and evolution one could ever hope to imagine. Well, unbeknownst to Teilhard, that contagion of flame had already begun right in his own backyard. In 1953, a fellow European by the name of Jean Gebser, German-born, Swiss naturalized, completed his magisterial tome, The Ever-Present Origin. And I thought I'd let you all see it. It's 550 some pages of very, very small print. But he completed it after more than 20 years of research and highly original reflection. I'm pretty sure, I'm virtually certain that Teilhard missed it, partly because by that time he was already in New York, settling into the final exile of his life, and partly because the two men traveled in slightly different intellectual circles. Teilhard, a scientist and Jesuit priest, Gebser, a phenomenologist and cultural historian. Gebser missed Teilhard too on the first round because at that time, 1949 when he began the writing and 1953 when he completed it, Teilhard's works were still thoroughly banned from publication. But Gebser didn't miss Teilhard on the second round, and in his 1973 revision of The Ever-Present Origin, as well as in his other writings, he indeed acknowledges Teilhard as one of the authentic mutations, as he calls it, announcing a quantum leap into the next stage of consciousness. So Teilhard by the end is definitely on Gebser's radar screen. And Gebser does some pretty interesting things with Teilhard. So for Gebser, the phenomenologist, consciousness was itself under development, a possibility that had evidently never occurred to Teilhard. For Teilhard, consciousness grew by simple aggregation, according to the law of complexification in consciousness. The more complex and articulated the structure bearing it forth, the greater the candle power of manifest consciousness. Gebser, in contrast, was interested in the emerging articulated structures of consciousness itself. consciousness didn't just occupy a pre-existing material structure, but itself in its evolutionary phases had its own articulated structure. And so Gebser's research yielded up a five-fold evolutionary schematic, roughly corresponding to the great ages of human civilization, and incidentally recapitulated in the individual development of each human beings. These five structures are respectively called, in Gebser's take, the archaic, the magic, the mythical, the mental, where we are right now, and the integral. This final structure now awaits us on the horizon and bears an uncanny resemblance to Teilhard's ultrahuman. Gebser may never have heard of the phrase a paroxysm of harmonized complexity, but he and Teilhard were definitely singing the same tune. Now here's the connecting link I want to make sure you know about. Gebser's five-fold schematic went on to lay the foundation for a huge swath of modern evolutionary theory and for the enormously popular integral evolutionary movement launched by American philosopher Ken Wilber. Wilber basically took over Gebser's five structures of consciousness, converted them into five stages of consciousness, a subtle but important difference, and then expanded the map of consciousness still further by adding on several additional third-tier categories borrowed from Buddhist reference points and culminating in the non-dual. This new map, in its mélange of Western and Eastern metaphysical categories, has enjoyed widespread influence in Christian circles as well, largely through the prominent place in the teachings of Thomas Keating and Richard Rohr. And it was through Thomas Keating, in fact, that I was first introduced to this map. But in the process of this expansion, the essential integrity of what both Gebser and Teilhard were intuitively groping toward has been subtly distorted, and nowhere more prominently than in the area of the personal. In this new quasi-Buddhist model, the personal is assigned to a more immature level of human development, definitely not carried forward into the higher evolutionary stages. When you hit the third tier at integral and beyond, the personal drops out in favor of an impersonal or at best transpersonal universe. And in a final double whammy, Teilhard's stubborn devotion to the personal is often used against him these days in evolutionary circles as proof positive that he's actually operating at a lower level of evolutionary consciousness, well beyond the ultra-human he was so ardently pointing toward. Well, it's this arrogant mistake that I want to challenge in my talk today. Teilhard is by no means working on lower levels of consciousness, but instead setting forth a characteristically Western and ecstatic vision of the highest states of realized consciousness, a vision independently confirmed by Gebser and suggesting a radically different scenario for the ultimate destination of the evolutionary journey. I want to review here what Teilhard actually means by the personal, and the basis on which he presses his claim that the higher evolutionary levels of consciousness must necessarily become more personal, not less so. Then, if time permits, it's up to you, Kathy, I want to double down on some of the remarkably fertile overlaps between Teilhard's hyper-personal and Gebser's integral, particularly with regard to intensification, diaphany, and this paroxysm of harmonized complexity, to see how their two complementary visions leverage each other and point the way toward a renewed confidence in the maturity and profundity of the Western unitive vision. So the 4 points, basically. The first, in Teilhard's understanding of the personal, the first and the starting point is that an individual and a person are not the same. Teilhard was among the first to make this decision, along with Thomas Merton, who was thinking probably independently along basically these same lines. And the differentiation is this: an individual basically lives to himself or herself alone. She lives in isolation or even in implicit competition with the whole, survival of the fittest. A person, by contrast, works within a relational field as a conscious part of that field, of that whole. In terms of the Gebserian structures of consciousness, an individual belongs to the middle stage of consciousness, and with the strong centrifugal egoism that Teilhard himself named is actually a poster child for that middle stage. A person represents and is in fact the functional unit of the next stage, the integral. He or she carries within herself a selfhood from which comes from a more spacious and interpenetrating place, deriving that sense of personal identity not from the part, me, but from the whole. So Teilhard's words here in the human phenomenon are really thrilling and call the question beautifully. He's talking about how it feels so good, so right, so natural to be an individual. It feels like I'm doing my thing, right? But he says the mistake is to confuse individuality with personality. In trying to distinguish itself as much as possible from others, the element individualizes itself, but in so doing, it falls back and tries to drag the rest of the world backwards towards plurality and matter. In reality, the element diminishes itself and becomes lost. To become fully ourselves, it is in the opposite direction we must advance, in the direction of convergence with all the rest, toward the other. The end of ourselves and the culmination of our originality is not in our individuality, but in our person. And according to the evolutionary structure of the world, the only way we can find our person is by uniting with the other. Well, does not this harrowingly foreshadow the evolutionary cusp on which our world is pinned right now? This cusp between these two evolutionary stages, the mental, the waning mental and the rising integral, as Gebser would put it. And we try to figure out which way to fall. We're going backward into plurality or forward into this convergent unity that marks the onset of the truly integral. So the two language systems, Gebser's and Teilhard's, really reinforce each other on this point here, and at any rate confirm the point that the person represents a higher evolutionary stage on the journey. Teilhard intuited that from his evolutionary map. Gebser confirms it chapter and verse from his phenomenological map. But why does the person represent a higher evolutionary stage? What empirical confirmation do we have for this assumption? And I think Teilhard is absolutely on his game right here. His extraordinary master insight is that consciousness itself can only manifest itself within a relational field and is in fact co-extensive with that relational field. While consciousness itself may theoretically belong to the primordial stuff of the universe as a biological sheet thin in the extreme, as Teilhard pictures it in The Human Phenomenon, that's page 24, it originally shares that same property with all the other stuff of the universe of extreme atomicity. It's all broken up into the little tiny bits and pieces, pixels, and hence it belongs to the unorganized multitude in its primitive original form, and hence it manifests in too small a dosage to really be perceptible, too small a concentration. It's too pixelated, it's too broken up, it's too atomized. So whatever it may be, until it begins to get together, it can't really make its presence felt. So it's only as matter converges to form larger units, and I would say larger organized units. That's what Teilhard means by arrangements. As it begins to articulate itself in more complex forms, that it's amplified enough to emerge onto the radar screen. If evolution is a rise in consciousness, it is also necessarily a rise in complexification. And I think nearly everybody who begins to break the back of Teilhardian studies stumbles with and tries to picture this key point. I love Ilia Delio's explanation here. It's a kind of IT, information technology definition, and I think it's just hilarious. It's in her Personal Transformation and Creative Evolution book. She says, consciousness is, in a basic sense, the flow of information across complex levels of relationship. The greater the degree of relationship, the greater the levels of informational flow. I'll read that again because it's short, but it really packs a whopper. Consciousness is, in a basic sense, the flow of information across complex levels of relationship. The greater the degree of relationship, the greater the levels of informational flow. In other words, the more relationship, the more complexity, the stronger the flow of consciousness. For Teilhard, consciousness, relationship, and the personal are an unbreakable triad. Each implies the other and can't be sustained apart from the other. And this is a fundamental and foundational principle, not only in Teilhardian theory, but a foundational metaphysical statement. And once it's seen, Teilhard's conclusion then becomes obvious that at the higher levels of consciousness, the world must become more personal, not less so, because consciousness is joined at the hip with relationality, and relationality is joined at the hip with intimacy. A felt sense of belonging to the whole, of taking one's bearings from the whole, not the part. And another name for that whole, for Teilhard, is God, consciousness in relational mode, which is the only mode in which consciousness can actually manifest. So when Teilhard, late in his life, impressed rather urgently on his friend Pierre Leroy, God is a person, God is a person, he meant just that. Not that God is a little old man with a beard up in the sky, not reflecting a childlike or magical level of consciousness, but that the universe, the visible manifestation of God's inmost nature, of God's heart, can only be personal, and that its point of ultimate transubstantiation can only occur within the sphere of the person. Because what could be relationality brought to a higher point than God itself? What could be a higher realization of consciousness than ultimate relationality, ultimate God? That's Teilhard's point. And that finally, I think, is the real source of Teilhardian hope. For God is not and can never be an it, an impersonal energetic force to be feared or manipulated, as it seems to devolve into in so much of kind of New Age, spiritual but not religious metaphysics. God is a thou, a lively and intelligent love seeking to manifest itself as the unifying force in all creation, to bring all things to their fullness in love. Gebser calls it originary presence, the same quality, this God seeking to manifest itself in form, in love, in breaking in to form and finitude. This presence is itself outside time, but it's always entering time from what we mistakenly call the future. It's actually not the future at all, like as in the next stop on a horizontal timeline, but it's the fullness, the divine fullness entering our finitude here and now, because it's both active and holographically present in us as our own seed, our own alpha and omega rolled into one. It bursts into the present, unifying, directing, revivifying, and tenderly touching, and it can only be met in the sphere of the person, in the relational field. Teilhard's great insight is that, as he says somewhere there in that final section, the impersonal is fundamentally unlovable. It's only when it meets us with a face, a heart, that it touches the depths in us as well and draws us forth along the evolutionary path that can only be navigated by love. Love is the directive energy of evolution, and it leads to consciousness whose culmination is none other than the full eclosion of love, a beautiful full circle. And love's intrinsic mode is personal. And when we try to in-run the personal, the whole wheels of evolution come grinding to a halt. There's nothing childish or immature here. This vision brilliantly survives the transposition to the integral level of consciousness. It is a mature vision of the non-dual fullness, the whole returning to itself, alpha to omega, fullness to fullness. Now, the other thing which is very important to reaffirm here is that Teilhard did not say this simply out of an intellectual theory. He said it out of the direct experience of having been met. In this final section of the human phenomenon, he acknowledges that he would never have dared even to imagine such a fantastical idea as the final convergence of consciousness at omega point if he did not already feel this convergence, this point, already alive and working in the world and in his own heart. And in his final essay, The Christic, he reiterates this point even more strongly in what amounts to essentially a beautiful double helix vision of Christ as both a radiant presence centered in his own heart, radiating out to the whole world, and also as that distant omega point on the horizon, drawing all of creation forward to its final completion in the macro consummation of that love. The cornerstone of Teilhardian hope and the Teilhardian and the cornerstone of Teilhardian evolutionary theory lie precisely in this direct, heart-grounded encounter with the ever-present divine thou, boring from within and drawing from beyond towards a final consummation whose outcome has never been in doubt because it's already written in our own hearts. And it's by turning there that we too will ultimately find it and confirm it in the realm of the person. So, in conclusion, I want to end by leaving you with what may be a new vocabulary word, at least for some. That word is ecstasy. You spell it Enstasy, and its adjectival form is ecstatic. It's the opposite of ecstasy. Ecstasy comes from the Latin root ecstasis, which means standing outside oneself. An ecstatic experience draws you beyond yourself, usually either in the direction of bliss or mystical union. Ecstasy, by contrast, is a fierce standing inside yourself, in your own ground, coiled and present, with a deepening capaciousness to bear the whole. It's the energy, it's the direction you see in the bush that burns but is not consumed, in that marvelous Old Testament image where the bush endures its own fiery emergence. You see it also in some of the symbols in Christianity, the image of the Theotokos, of the fully divine Christ blazing and glowing out of the finite womb of Mary. You see it in the Transfiguration and in the incarnation itself. God, fully human, fully God, not bursting the container, but rather living within it, inhabiting it fully as a density and radiance that brings the whole thing into luminosity. It's a different take of ultimate realization, of the relationship between the infinite and the finite. Not oneness by the drop dissolving in the ocean, but oneness by the drop fully concentrated, or the ocean fully concentrated and manifest in the drop. That's ecstasy. And so if we can say this, I would say that Teilhard's view of evolution is profoundly ecstatic. In fact, he fought ecstasy all his life, the siren call, as he took it, of the Asian traditions to dissolve into the whole. His omega point is not a dissolving into a ground luminosity, but once again, that phrase, a paroxysm of harmonized complexity in which the whole of the whole shines forth within human form, fully whole and fully particular. An ecstatic version, the articulation of love, of divine being, of the divine heart, compressed to maximum intensity. Now, in this insight, he's directly paralleled and upheld by Jean Gebser. The two are birds in the same flock. For Gebser, integral is not an extension or expansion of consciousness, as we typically see it in evolutionary theories today. It's an intensification of consciousness. It's an intensification of the capacity to bear originary presence in one's own flesh. It's an increasing depth and dimensionality and complexity, which points, just as in Elio Delio's construction, to a greater flow of information across increasingly complex levels of relationship. His vocabulary shares many of the same words as Teilhard's, particularly diaphany, transparency, dimensionality, differentiation. Reading Gebser and Teilhard together is an extraordinary sort of double reinforcement. The two leverage each other, and I believe point toward a characteristically Western and ecstatic version of higher states of attained realization, which both reconcile us to our religious and devotional traditions, and also turn toward the world with a renewed emphasis on directed action and hope. We are accompanied, we are met, we are going somewhere which is not out of the world, but in the world fully brought of age to truly bear the beams of love. It's a message of, I think, extraordinary hope, extraordinary direction. And I think it's time now for evolutionists, evolutionary theorists, phenomenologists, and perhaps for Teilhardians as well, to join forces and name this ecstatic dimension for what it is, and to begin to work with it directly as a tie rod connecting a uniquely Western, mystical, and hopeful vision of evolutionary emergence, which has in it the capacity to bring, as I've said, not only a renewed vision and energy to Teilhardian's scholarship, but a renewed and much more comprehensive and forcefully presented message of hope and coherency for our broken and troubled world. So with that, I leave you with blessings and gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. What an amazing talk. Can everybody hear me? You can hear me, right? Wow. You certainly have given us a lot to think about. I think we're going to need to listen to your talk several more times in the recording. I want to invite people to put your questions in the chat box, and I will then read the chat box and then pull questions from there to give to Cynthia. Kathy, by the way, I'm Jennifer Morgan, and I'm Vice President of the American Teilhard Association. And Kathleen Degnan and I will be watching the chat box and then saying the questions for Cynthia. So go ahead, everybody, start typing away in the chat box. And we're already getting some things. Beautiful, thank you. And static dimension, I think that means. Yes, please, and thank you. I'd like to just ask you a question, Cynthia, while people start putting things in the chat box. The intensification of consciousness, the relational field, so many of us grew up in a Christian background, immersed in the Trinity. And it seems that the Trinity speaks very directly to everything you're talking about. I was wondering if you could just make some connections there for us.
I think you're exactly right on that one, Jennifer. And it shows you a little bit about what I mean by this, that everything leverages everything else. Because once you see that the Trinity is also a icon of this relational field, we can stop talking about it just theologically or sentimentally, and we can begin to see it as Christianity's intuitive mandala for consciousness, for the personal, for the relational. And so it doesn't look like this weird little doctrinal eccentricity that was imposed on Christianity, by some 4th century theologians anymore. It looks like an organic reconnection with this ecstatic path that Christianity has been, that actually came into being around. I think it was the path and the ecstatic nature of conscious emergence that actually called Christianity into being, and not the other way around. So they work really well together, and they torque each other up. And this is what I mean by opening up whole new windows of connections, that we can go back to the whole thing and say, hey, the problem may have been that we were just trying to explain Christianity on too narrow, and you might call it scholarly, scholastic, a theological basis. When you reconnect it with science, with archetypal vision, with evolutionary theory, the points all begin to line up and glow much more strongly.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it certainly does seem to line up amazingly. We're getting a bunch of questions here. From Linda, what is the link between the enstatic realm you were talking about and the imaginal realm you address in Eye of the Heart?
Yeah. Well, enstatic is not so much a realm, but a kind of organization of reality, a direction. You basically, what you would say is basically the great metaphysical traditions of the world are either basically ecstatic in nature or instatic in nature. And the majority of them are actually ecstatic, that they point the whole, the one, as a return to or a dissolving in an infinite, which is beyond form. They find form as essentially a an intermediate and sometimes an awkward stage in the journey towards wholeness. The instatic really go in the other direction. And one of the greatest sort of symbols of this or icons of this comes from the Sufi, from the Islamic tradition, is a saying from the Quran, extra Quranic sayings, that God speaks and says, "I was a hidden treasure, and I yearned to be known, so I created the worlds visible and invisible." In other words, the whole insight that in order for God or consciousness to be known, there has to be a creation which is coextensive with the divine transparency, the divine heart. So it moves in the other direction. And so I think that the first step is to acknowledge the instatic direction of certainly of the great Western traditions, certainly Christianity, certainly Islam, and I think to a strong degree Judaism as well. Once you've said that, my work in the imaginal cross cross references pretty well, because the imaginal represents this next level of intensification. If you work at what I said about imaginal causality, you'll find that it works in a way which is much more precise, quick, and comprehensive than than what you'll find in just the linear mental world that we live in today. It moves instantaneously. And I laid out some of the principles, but those would be really consistent with what Gebser calls the move into the integral stage, where more and more kind of paradox and simultaneity is enters, and where time is set free from its sort of metronomic beat that we experience it as here, to become an element in the artist's canvas. So it takes a deeper consciousness to be able to hold all this. And that's exactly what the imaginal pours into. It pours into the maturing in static consciousness.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Bede Bidlock about Trinity said, Trinity, yes, perhaps there is an ecstasy in the persons of the Trinity so that they withhold some of themselves in favor of relationality. And I'll just do a question here from Mary Evelyn Tucker, and then Kathleen Degnan, I know you're right there. Why don't you find the next question after that? So here's one from Mary Evelyn Tucker. Wonderful, Cynthia. Would you equate in Teilhard's thought personal, spirit, and omega point? Each are ever present, relational, and drawing evolution forward.
One of the words that I really like, Mary Evelyn, is the whole idea of intertextuality, which doesn't say in any way that they're equal or they're the same, but it says they're definitely in conversation, and there's juice flowing in that conversation. So I would definitely say that all of the above are in conversation. And you can actually, when you move intentionally into your heart and lower in your body, you can feel that conversation as a kind of dynamism within your own being. And to catch that is really thrilling. It talks about where Teilhardian insight and mystical vision comes alive and is reverberated as a dynamic force running through all creation. And I believe reduplicated throughout the layers and layers of the ecosystems of creation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Kathleen, do you have a question you'd like to put out there?
Yes, I see a number of questions. That, first of all, a salute to Cynthia for her book on the Law of Three. Just noting this resonance with the experience and symbol of the Trinity. But folks are asking, how do we bring this vision, especially of ecstasy, into everyday life and into our relationships with each other? How do we actualize it and live it?
Well, if the truth be told, it actually begins in practice. And it begins in the practice of being in your body. And a lot of us spend most of the time, in our heads, in our minds from the neck up, and we don't even know we're doing it. And we come down into our hearts a little, but we equate our heart with emotions, which it really is not primarily about. And we lose track of the rest of us, and it gets too sentimental and ungrounded. So it really begins with some simple practices. I think the simplest and static practice is to stand up in your body if you could stand up, if not, sit tall as you can. Sense your feet on the ground. Sense the life force flowing through your skin, through your body, through your capillaries, and say from the whole of yourself, I am. And really spend a little bit of time each day resonating with this. The author of The Cloud of Unknowing says, pay attention not to what you are, but to that you are. That the same energies that flow through the sun and the stars and the cosmos flow through you and are your life. And that is your gift undeniable, whether you're smart, dumb, on the top of your game or at the bottom of your game. You are. And once we learn to fully inhabit our own being, then it becomes easier to be there for another, simply honoring and acknowledging their full being, not with words, but wordlessly staying present, bringing our attention into encounters, bringing our attention into our encounters with life. Not in a sentimental way, but in a just embodied way. And as that happens, we actually begin to become a force field in ourselves. We do begin to become singular attractors in very, very small ways. And as we do that, others can converge with us. And again, it has nothing to do with lesson plans and shared common visions. I can connect being to being with people who have radically different political convictions from mine. We got a lot of people living in my town who would fit that job description. But to be a human being. And so it's through the shared force. Gebser talks about this beautifully in his description of the magic structures of consciousness that are still alive in us, and that are shape-shifting, interpenetrating, able to draw that vital energy, that élan, as Teilhard called it, from life. So I think as we find it in ourselves, we become magnets of it. And for me, there's where the real hope and the work lies.
Thank you.
And this is following up on that, Cynthia. Joseph Mitchell says, wonderful presentation. Thank you for the suggestion to be in one's body, to realize that I am. Does Teilhard himself suggest practices or a path to realize ecstasy?
Well, I think he was out there on his paleontological expeditions until the last year of his life. His hands in the ground, his connection, his science was a very, very deeply grounding practice for him. And I think the other deeply grounding practice for him was the mystical devotion of the heart of Christ that he learned on his mother's knee, the Sacred Heart of Life, something in him picked up the radiant presence of Christ. We all know that little icon that he had on his desk to the very end of that brilliant radiating heart of Christ going out. And Teilhard was in his body, I believe, not all the time, but for the very best and deepest of the times of his theological and mystical insight. And I think that those formed a beautiful counterpoint and grounding to his deeply Jesuit spirituality, which I'm hoping and trusting Louis Savory will tell you more about and has already. But they hold his feet to the planet in a wonderful way.
Oh, that's great. Kathleen, do you have a question?
Well, we have an offering from Bede Bidlack, who wants to recommend to us his own book, In Good Company, The Body and Divinization and the Thought of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and Taoist Zhao Yingsu. So thank you for that, Bede.
Great, thank you, Bede.
Yeah, I would just add in there, if I could,
Yeah.
that one of my kind of ulterior motives in widening the field this wide at the beginning was to say that there's a lot of juice flowing through the intellectual, the interspiritual, evolutionary movements today that I think winds up when we can situate and name Teilhard correctly, adding energy and credibility. Wide credibility to the visionary thing that Teilhard was up to. And a lot of the really good scholarship that's gone on in Teilhardian circles has been within, scholastic and Jesuit and Christian theological categories. As we make these connections with Taoism, as Buddhism, with science, with Gebser, with evolutionary theory, I think we begin to understand what a treasure we actually have, and it's a world treasure.
Yeah, we seem to have this theme of embodiment coming up over and over again. Denise Tangney says, "I believe the heart is the sense organ of consciousness." And then we go to Elizabeth, the Mass on the world. Can it be created to be a true Mass with the prayers and understanding of Teilhard's, "This is my body, this is my blood"? This is a difficult to express. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an interesting question, and I don't know what's meant by a true Mass. I do know that we've offered the Mass on the world many times in every corner of the world at this point, except Antarctica, perhaps, as an actual liturgy. And we find, at one point I tried to just take the words of it and drop them into the Eucharistic words, the prayers of consecration. And you can get away with that in the Episcopal Church, I think. But if truth be told, it didn't work as well, because Teilhard's Mass on the world is really an imaginal Mass. He means it. This is my body. The world is my body. The world, the suffering is my blood. And when you move to this next level of consciousness, with all deepest respect to the physical Eucharist, it gives way. The symbols give way to reveal the naked reality of the thing itself,
Wow.
which the Eucharist was pointing to. And I say that extremely cautiously, but I mean it, that even the Eucharist is ultimately the finger pointing at the moon. And the moon is the fully complete heart of God given for us. And you can taste that at another level of consciousness directly. And Teilhard, in our better renditions of the Mass on the world, you do taste that. the words themselves and the heart, and it's almost as if the mystical profundity from which he was seeing comes through as an energy in its own right and consecrates wherever you are, and brings it into this evolving mystical body.
We also have a question from Therese. How do you understand deprivation, the dark night, in this process toward personalization? It comes with a number of questions on contemplative practice.
Yeah. Well, the dark night is definitely part of the equation. And I think that this is one of the things that the ecstatic model allows us to stand in a little bit more fully, because the ecstatic model is prone, you know, to spiritual bypassing, to allowing high states to sort of take us out of low states, uh, to sweeping aside the darkness in favor of the emerging light. Ecstasy means you have to stand in the whole thing until you find that place where, as in Psalm 139, it says, if I say that the darkness will take me and my only light will turn to dark, darkness is not dark to you, Lord. The night shines as bright as the day. Darkness and light to you are both alike. And that's ecstasy. And we see that ecstasy in Teilhard, that he decided to abide at tremendous personal cost by his vows, by his obedience, by his consecration to the priesthood, to take on the dark side. And he spent much of his final years of his life in deep depression and nervous exhaustion. He took it on. And in the integral mode, in the ecstatic mode, you realize that these two must and can be integrated. And my own take is it's through this ecstatic route going all the way down to the dark that you finally meet Jesus on the cross and understand what this was all about and why there could be no salvation of the planet apart from that ultimate standing in the darkness of self, not just in one's own, but on collective, in collective solidarity with the difficult course that evolution would have to follow to come to its integral completion.
Thank you. I think in that you've answered Candace Bartlett's question about how do ecstasy and ecstasy dance together.
And they do. They dance, and I appreciate that question, because one of the things we do in the middle structure of consciousness is we separate into polar opposites, two things which actually exist in polarity. And ecstasy and ecstasy are always in polarity, and we're in polarity even to Teilhard. If you look at the very end of his his final rapture in Armageddon, he's imagining the ones who've integrated bursting off in a final ecstatic burst, and so to the end, the thing stays with him, and it stays with everything. And I think that individuals temperamentally find their natural ground one way to the other. But as we embrace both in ourselves, we're able to walk a fuller spectrum, more complete human fullness.
Here's something to connect to Latin America, which which just shows how Teilhard's message is so universal. This comes from Aurora Camacho de Schmidt. This is very important for me to hear. Nicaraguan poet and priest Ernesto Cardenal, a follower of Teilhard, writes a mystical poem, Cosmic Canticle, but brings into it the torture chambers of Latin America together with the ecstatic sense of the beauty of the universe. Comments?
Yes, brilliant. Brilliant, and thank you for bringing forward that connecting link. I think you're exactly on the right path, and it's wonderful how these last two questions and comments have brought forward so boldly this dimension of the necessity of suffering and the stark, pitiless reality of human atrocity and degradation and darkness as part of what also exists in the whole that is the heart of God. We have to deal, but that's a courageous mention and absolutely true.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Cynthia. Well, we just have a few more minutes before we need to go to the break. But Kathleen, do you have something?
Well, I'm scanning our questions, and they're all really interlacing with this whole challenge of the darkness, the challenge of suffering, and these, in a sense, exalted notions and desires of the human. And I think that what folks are asking is how do we creatively, faithfully stand within that darkness and still do the great work of promoting the movement toward personalization and Omega.
Yeah, beautiful, Kathleen.
Yeah. I'm gonna take it to the simplest form. It's only possible because Christ stands with us. It's a little beyond each one of us. As we personally come up against darkness, we understand that when it gets really, really dark, it overpowers us. A single human being cannot stand against the gathered force of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I would say it's exactly for that reason that that Christ's own earthly mission, if you want to call it that, had to be consummated on the cross. It couldn't bypass it, because the way of evolution, the way of conscious evolution, at least as we understand it in the West, requires us to move through that darkness and in that darkness, and bring it with us. Not necessarily to bring it into the light, because that would be a happy ending, but to accept the whole thing as whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so in standing there with us in that time, particularly that we call the harrowing of hell, he accepted fully the conditions of our planet,
Mm-hmm.
and universalized his heart, And to extend Teilhard's metaphor a little further, he's not just the point drawing us ahead to Omega, but he's the heart pushing us forward toward Omega, lining our own inadequacy when we would otherwise be too scared to move. And so one of the reasons I've been so keen about trying to reclaim some of the classic teaching of our Christian tradition is because I think the great ace we have up our sleeve is this Christic realization, that the Teilhardian Christic realization, that Christ is not just some God in the sky that we worship, but an actual evolutionary force that can be personally ground truth within our being and turn to as we stand before forces that on our own are greater than we can manage.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Well, that sounds like the perfect ending point right there. You just really summed up your whole presentation right there. Thank you so much.
And if I may say also a thank you, Cynthia, I feel that you've invited us to a new appreciation and appropriation of the wisdom and the power of our Western mystical traditions. And I think that's very important in our own time, as so many of us are doing interspiritual work and engagement And I think sometimes we perhaps may migrate away from the gift we have and its value for everyone.
That was my intention. So if it was received, I feel like I've done well.
You've done well,
Done well.
very well.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Thank you, Cynthia, for a phenomenal presentation. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you to everyone in our community today for your excellent questions. At this point, we're going to take just a break for a few minutes to give everyone a chance to stand up, stretch, use the restroom, or get a drink. So we will return at about 22 past the hour, wherever you might be on the planet Earth at this time. So we'll have a musical presentation playing while we have the break, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll give everyone just another moment to get back in their seat and situated here as we prepare to start our second series of presentations for the day. And the first of these will be coming from Lou Savory, who has an interdisciplinary background and really has the gift of being able to take complex concepts when it comes to Teilhard's writing and make them a lot lighter for us to hold. So he's authored a number of different books on Teilhard and his works, and his most recent is called The Human Phenomenon Explained. So, or The Phenomenon of Man Explained. So I now introduce you to Lou Savory.
Well, thanks, Andrew, and hello, everyone. This is Lou Savory, and thanks to Sister Kathleen Duffy, president of the American Teilhard Society. She graciously invited me to say a few words about my latest book. It's an explanation of Teilhard's most challenging work, his scientific masterpiece, The Phenomenon of Man. Now, I know there's a more recent translation called The Human Phenomenon by Sarah Appleton Weber. Her detailed critical translation of Teilhard's French manuscript is a marvelous contribution. But I chose to work from the original English translation because my first Harper and Row copy of The Phenomenon of Man, now falling apart in my hands, is where all my notes and underlines are. From almost 40 years of reading and rereading Teilhard's magnificent scientific work. Now, the main reason I wrote Phenomenon Explained is because over the years, what I heard again and again from people about Teilhard's phenomenon, that it was impossible to understand. And sadly, most people simply gave up reading it. And that's a shame because the phenomenon was Teilhard's great prophetic book. And though he wrote it about 100 years ago, it still has many valuable insights to guard our way into the future. The phenomenon is the writing of a prophet of our time. The work of prophets is never done, and phenomenon should inspire us to discover our own prophetic voices. I had put off writing the explanation of phenomenon for years. Instead, I produced books for the general reader on various themes like Teilhard on love, on morality, on suffering, on the Gospels, on the Eucharist. And honestly, I was afraid to tackle attempting an explanation of phenomenon for the ordinary reader. But a few years ago, when I began paging through my old copy of Phenomenon, I realized that it was too important a book to let my fear win out. After all, it is a book that changed the entire direction of my own life, professionally and spiritually, and many more people, of course. And for me, the book was a goldmine of insights on how to live my professional life integrated with my spiritual life. So I look upon myself the task of trying to explain it in simple, clear language. I do not want anyone who loves Teilhard to miss out on the great ideas in this book. I will admit it was the hardest book I ever put together, but it was the most satisfying one too, when I finally finished writing it. One of Teilhard's most powerful insights for me is the idea, as he said, that union differentiates. Being in a relationship or on a team with a shared purpose, each one's qualities emerge and are developed in ways that might otherwise never happen. And every musician in a symphony orchestra knows this fact and is challenged to develop their abilities now. Now, what most people miss is that a union is able to differentiate and enrich its members because the union itself is a new being with its own emergent properties that none of its members alone possesses. In a marriage, husband and wife are differentiated, yes, but it is the marriage relationship, the union, a new being in itself that raises a loving family. In sports, only a team can win a game. No individual player can do it alone. And remember, creating a vaccine for COVID-19 needed a great scientific team to accomplish it. No one scientist alone could have done it. So Teilhard's phenomenon is still prophetic. It still has many visible things to say to science and to religion that neither field has yet to recognize or act upon. Most of his discoveries about evolution, its omnipresence in the universe, the laws of evolution, its direction, the noosphere, and complexity as a new scientific measurement, these are all revealed in their original forms in Phenomenon. So in my book, I followed Teilhard's English text section by section, and at the head of each section, I give the corresponding page numbers of the original Harper and Row translation and of the newer one by Appleton Weber. So from either translation, you can easily compare Teilhard's original words to my explanation. And by the way, if you're looking for my book on Amazon Books, Amazon lists it incorrectly as the human phenomenon explained. Anyway, key ideas in the original phenomenon are easy to miss. For example, many of Teilhard's insights and perspectives are densely packed in the first 6 pages of his book's preface. So I spend 25 pages breaking down and clarifying what he says in those 6 pages, point by point, because they're so essential. His preface is titled Seeing. He hopes in his book to teach people, even scientists, how to develop new eyes that can see the genesis and emergence of the human phenomenon the way he sees it. Okay, so I provide a comprehensive glossary of terms that he uses so that when a certain term reappears later on in the text, if you've forgotten its meaning, you can easily check it up in the glossary. Now, since many readers' Phenomenon are religious people, I insert in the text from time to time a spiritual reflection. It's what I suspect that Teilhard, the priest mystic, might have going through his mind as he reflected on what he had just written for scientists. And finally, I'm hoping that the Phenomenon explained will open the door for many who have tried and given up on the original. I can assure those who are scientifically minded that Teilhard will give you a new perspective on evolution. And for those who are coming to Teilhard from a religious perspective, I hope they will realize how important it is to begin integrating evolution into their theological thinking. So, if you decide to take up your copy, Teilhard's Phenomenon again, and you still find it hard to read and understand, perhaps Phenomenon Explained may offer some help. And thanks for your time.
And where can people find your book? On Amazon, is that the easiest way?
Yes, that's the easiest.
Very good. Well, thank you. We look forward to reading that. And now at this time, I would like to introduce Tracy Higgins, who will be introducing our next 2 speakers.
Great. So I am so happy to have Teilhard's grandniece to speak to us on video. Marie is the granddaughter of Teilhard's brother Joseph, and she will share with us some of her work on Teilhard and the feminine. Officially, Marie is in charge of the Association of the Nephews of Teilhard de Chardin, which is a family organization set up to manage the demands of the family heritage with the history of Pierre Teilhard's life within it, and the conservation of his vision and the integrity of his work. But personally, Marie is an amazing woman of great faith who I have had the privilege to know. She's a mother of 5 children, an incredible artist, sculptress, and painter, an expert in the history and work of Teilhard, and not to mention an extremely generous and delightful person. It's very challenging to address this topic in such a limited time, and I'm grateful for her recording this message for us in French. So here is Teilhard's grandniece, Marie Bayon de la Tour.
Je vous remercie de m'avoir invité à ce colloque. Je le fais depuis la France. Je m'associe par la technique. J'espère que ma vidéo ne sera pas trop mauvaise. Je ne suis pas une spécialiste. Je viens vous parler du père Teilhard et du féminin. C'est un aspect pour lequel il n'a pas toujours été perçu et analysé avec la profondeur qu'il mérite. Nous allons essayer d'entrer dans l'expérience et la vision qui ont été les siennes et qui peuvent certainement encore beaucoup apporter à l'Église. En effet, s'il est un sujet délicat entre tous, c'est bien celui des relations d'un jésuite, prêtre de l'Église catholique, avec les femmes. Le père Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, homme rempli de charme, à l'existence apparemment libre, eut de belles amitiés masculines d'abord. Et il connut également de belles et grandes amitiés féminines. Toutes ces amitiés furent pour lui de véritables appuis dans une existence mouvementée et parfois difficile. Lorsqu'au sortir de la guerre, la Grande Guerre en 1918, le père Teilhard prononce ses vœux de jésuite, le 26 mai 1918, il dit avec clairvoyance « Je vais faire vœu de pauvreté. Jamais je n'ai mieux compris à quel point l'argent peut être un moyen puissant pour le service et la glorification de Dieu. Je vais faire vœu de chasteté. Jamais je n'ai mieux compris à quel point l'homme et la femme peuvent se compléter pour s'élever à Dieu. Je vais faire vœu d'obéissance. Jamais je n'ai mieux compris combien Dieu rend libre dans son service. » Donc pour ce qui touche notre domaine, vous voyez, je vais faire vœu de chasteté. Jamais je n'ai mieux compris à quel point l'homme et la femme peuvent se compléter pour s'élever à Dieu. On va retrouver cette ligne de conduite toute son existence. Le père Teilhard de Chardin est un homme d'une grande sensibilité. Sensibilité de nature et sensibilité probablement exacerbée par les deuils successifs, parfois vécus très jeune, il a perdu des frères et des sœurs en bas âge, et par l'épreuve du silence et de l'exil qui lui furent imposés en raison de la teneur de ses aigris spirituels. Nous ne pouvons évoquer ici en détail toutes les femmes qu'il a rencontrées au cours de sa vie, parfois très mobile comme nous l'avons vu. Mais il est important cependant de citer les femmes de sa famille, tout d'abord sa mère, ses sœurs, sa sœur Françoise, petite sœur des pauvres, qui est décédée à Shanghai en 1911, sa sœur Marguerite Marie, grande malade, qui était présidente de l'Union catholique des malades. C'était une sorte de réseau avant la lettre. Les malades se soutenaient entre eux. Et enfin, sa cousine Marguerite Teilhard-Chambon, confidente pendant toute son existence. Et nous pouvons aussi évoquer ses amis, Ida Tritt, Léontine Zanta, Simone Bégoin, Lucille Swann, Claude Rivière et bien entendu Jeanne Mortier. Ce sont des femmes exceptionnelles pour leur génération. Les unes sont agrégées de lettres et écrivains, les autres scientifiques, artistes ou encore théologiennes. Et elles vont contribuer en quelque sorte à l'élaboration de ces essais, bien souvent soumis à leur attention et à leur critique bienveillante. Certaines seront sans doute à la source de ces textes sur le féminin, d'autres encore participeront par leur aide matérielle à la diffusion de ces écrits. Si nous pouvons suivre cette étude du féminin avec un grand F dans toute l'œuvre du père Teilhard de Chardin, elle constitue le thème principal de 3 de ses textes. L'Éternel féminin, rédigé en 1918, L'évolution de la chasteté en 1934 et qu'il considérait comme un texte n'étant pas abouti et qu'il ne voulait pas publier, et la fin de son texte Le cœur de la matière, écrit en 1950, fin intitulée Le féminin ou l'unitif. L'unitif, c'est bien aussi un signe de ce qu'il en pensait. Alors, on ne peut pas ne pas citer la fin de son texte L'Éternel féminin, écrit entre le 19 et le 25 mars 1918 à Verzy, sur le front, sur les lignes de front. Il a 37 ans et il utilise un magnifique vocabulaire poétique pour exprimer sa vision du féminin. Je le cite. « Alors que vous me croirez absente », c'est le féminin qui parle bien sûr, « alors que vous me croirez absente, alors que vous m'oublierez, air de votre poitrine, lumière de vos yeux, je serai encore là, noyé dans le soleil que j'ai attiré en moi. Il vous suffit, n'est-il pas vrai, bienheureux élu, de relâcher pour un instant la tension qui vous précipite en Dieu, ou de regarder un tant soit peu en Dieu du foyer qui vous fascine, pour voir de nouveau, à la surface du feu divin, se jouer mon image. Et à ce moment, vous admirez que dans les longs plis de mes charmes se déroule toujours vivante la série des attractions successivement traversées qui, depuis les confins du néant, ont fait accourir et se rassembler les éléments de l'esprit par amour. Je suis l'éternel féminin. Ainsi, nous l'avons déjà vu s'esquisser cette idée que parce qu'il est partie prenante de la vision d'un monde en évolution, le féminin aide l'homme à s'arracher à lui-même pour mieux aller à Dieu. Et le père Teilhard note le problème qui se cherche sous la chasteté, la spiritualisation maxima dans ses rapports avec le féminin. Nous entrevoyons maintenant que c'est une affaire non plus de séparation, mais de synthèse. Essentiellement, le féminin n'est pas un lest, un poids, mais une force ascensionnelle. Ainsi, pour lui, cet arrachement à lui-même, de l'homme, se doit donc d'être une croissance qui participe à la construction du monde. Et il écrit à une amie, à Claude Rivière, « Le contact profond de deux êtres, centre à centre, vous disais-je, n'est-ce pas l'opération la plus créatrice dans l'univers qui nous entoure ?» Parce qu'il aime les hommes, l'humanité, il cherche la meilleure voie pour eux. Et Pierre Teilhard a toujours vécu avec une certitude, je le cite, « On ne convertit que ce qu'on aime ». Mais il n'ignore pas non plus combien son propre chemin est incompréhensible pour son entourage, car c'est le Christ qu'il cherche à travers ses rencontres. Et il écrit dans Le cœur de la matière, en parlant bien entendu de lui-même, je le cite, « Même pour ceux qu'il aimait le plus, son affection serait une charge, car il le sentirait chercher invinciblement quelque chose derrière eux, et quelque chose est souligné. » Pour le père Teilhard, la source de ses engagements se trouve donc bien dans la venue du Christ. Et il écrit dans le milieu divin, en vertu de la création, et plus encore de l'incarnation, rien n'est profane ici-bas à qui sait voir, rien n'est profane et souligné. Malgré les incompréhensions qu'entraîne sa pensée, il est attaché à l'Église et lui restera toujours fidèle. Il s'agit d'une fidélité intérieure, car le Christ ne lui appartient pas, et il est celui de l'Église. Attaché à l'Église, mais toujours tourné vers l'avenir et voulant le meilleur pour elle, il écrit en 1929 à son ami le père Godefroy, je le cite, « Il m'a semblé que, dans l'Église actuelle, il y a 3 pierres périssables, dangereusement engagées dans la fondation, dans les fondations de l'Église. La première est un gouvernement qui exclut la démocratie. La deuxième est un sacerdoce qui exclut et minimise la femme. La troisième est une révélation qui exclut, pour l'avenir, la prophétie. » Ainsi, la vie et la pensée de père Teilhard sont d'une extrême cohérence. Fils de saint Ignace, il vit dans la réalité du monde. Le féminin en est une composante fondamentale. Dans un contexte fort différent du nôtre, il ne l'évite pas, il cherche courageusement la voie d'intégration de toutes les dimensions de la femme dans l'Église et dans sa propre vision du Christ universel. Les femmes l'inspirent et elles l'aident à élargir sa vision. Le père Douins, grand ami du père Teilhard, supérieur de la maison des études, la revue jésuite, témoigne, je cite le père Douins. Teilhard pensait que l'intuition et la sensibilité féminine apportaient au jugement trop exclusivement rationnel de l'homme un complément précieux et pour lui, du moins, indispensable. Il attendait donc de ses correspondantes une lumière et un secours pour choisir plus exactement sa route. Il avait en même temps trop vive conscience du bienfait de la foi pour ne pas désirer, dans toute la mesure du possible, en offrir le partage. Pierre Teilhard n'a pas esquivé la difficulté d'une attitude par trop déshumanisante du nombre de ses pairs, de ses condisciples, prêtres, religieux, face aux femmes. Arrivé en fin de sa vie, donc en 1950, Le cœur de la matière, il écrit « Pas plus que de lumière, d'oxygène et de vitamines, L'homme, aucun homme, ne peut, d'une évidence chaque jour plus criante, se passer de féminin. Propos qui n'étaient certainement pas très conventionnels pour l'époque, et cependant il nous invite à une vision anthropologique novatrice de l'apport du féminin. Chercheur de Dieu et mystique, le témoignage de Pierre Teilhard apporte un enseignement pour l'Église. Il sait que l'amour humain est inscrit dans un autre amour bien plus grand et qui en est la source. Amour divin qui dilate la capacité d'aimer et de se donner aux autres. Le père Teilhard de Chardin nous confie dans son journal en 1950, à l'époque du cœur de la matière, je le cite, « La terre, sans un oméga d'amour, serait inhabitable. » La terre sans un oméga d'amour serait inhabitable. C'est bien là tout l'enjeu de la vie, de notre vie, et de la vie spirituelle de la société qui est posée. Comme nombre de religieux, pas uniquement chrétiens, par le respect de ses vœux, Pierre renvoie au monde une image de celui à qui il s'est donné. C'est ce qu'exprime un autre jésuite, le père Martelet, aujourd'hui décédé, avec qui nous concluons, je cite le père Martelet, « L'humanité d'un prêtre, d'un religieux et d'une religieuse n'est jamais dispensée d'une affectivité capable d'être saisie humainement au plus profond de soi-même par l'autre. » L'exemple en ce cas n'est pas d'abord le père Teilhard, mais le Christ en personne, dans l'historicité de son rapport aux femmes de son temps. Qu'il s'agisse des gestes de la Galiléenne chez Simon le lépreux, de la Syrophénicienne aux limites de la judéité, de la Samaritaine au puits de Jacob, ou de Marie de Magdala dans le jardin de la résurrection, Jésus s'est laissé imprégner par des femmes d'une tendresse humaine inséparable pour lui, de sa messianité. Je vous remercie et très bon colloque.
Thanks so much to Marie for having prepared that video for us. I'm sorry she's not able to be here with us today. But now we have one more video. I'm so happy that we have to present to you. We have my dear friend Marie-Joseph Conchon. Marie is one of our incredible leaders in the French Teilhard Association. She is a retired corporate communications director, trained jurist, and now an author working on yet another book. Her last book on Marguerite Teilhard de Chardin gave us a thorough and brilliant history of one of Teilhard's closest friends and his trusted confidant throughout his lifetime. Marguerite was an accomplished author, professor, and political activist who introduced Pierre to intellectual circles in Paris. Marie-Joseph conceived the idea of finding out who Marguerite really was, being so close to Teilhard, and for years meticulously researched Marguerite's history as a fascinating woman of her time in her own right, who not only shared her letters from Teilhard, but she herself was a keen observer with profound insights who wrote brilliantly. So let's go to my dear friend, Marie-Joseph.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Tracy Higgins and all the organizers of this meeting. I'm so happy for this opportunity to tell you about Marguerite Teilhard Chambon. Today, Marguerite is mostly known as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin cousin. After a common childhood in Auvergne, in the center of France, they later on met in Paris when Pierre completed his studies as a Jesuit. He had just been ordained a priest. That is when they became very close. Maybe some of you have read the letters Pierre wrote to Marguerite during World War I, Genèse d'une pensée. We can guess through these letters Marguerite's character and personality. So close to him, she was indeed his alter ego. She was the one who had introduced him to most intellectual circles in Paris. She was also the one who encouraged him in his scientific studies. In his diary, Pierre wrote in February 1917, "Who knows me if not Margue?" These friendships lasted throughout their life. They constantly supported and encouraged each other. In 1956, just over 1 year after his cousin's death, Marguerite published Letters from a Traveler, which could be seen as the first and so vivid biography of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. For her, he was a citizen of the universe. Marguerite was such a great personality. She was one of the first agrégés de lettres at the Sorbonne in 1904. As a student, she had the opportunity to attend Henry Bergson's classes at the Collège de France. She became a great educator, a pioneer in the education of girls. She also campaigned for women's right to vote, for the promotion of culture and work for all in all social circles. She then became known as a writer, as a member of the Prix Féminin jury. She was really at the heart of the literary and intellectual life at that time. She was recognized as a great biographer. She was interested in cultured women, such as Madeleine de Scudéry, in the 17th century. Women who had invented the art of politeness and conversation. She took as a pen name Claude Aragonès, from the name of a close relative of Madeleine de Scudéry. Marguerite was also interested in women engaged in education, like Françoise d'Aubigny, Marquise de Maintenon, the secret wife of the King of France, Madame Louis XIV. She founded a school for young girls without fortune. For her pupils, she had commissioned a play from Racine, Esther. Later on, Marguerite will write herself a play for her students, Esther à Saint-Cyr, telling this story. Two other biographies particularly caught the public's attention. Marie d'Agoult, Une destinée romantique. It is the life of Franz Liszt's muse, which introduces us to the musical, literary, and political life of the 19th century. Last but not least, Marguerite La's biography is dedicated to Abraham Lincoln, héros d'un peuple, a family affair in a way that would like now to tell you about. Marguerite's godfather, her uncle, Xavier Teilhard-Chambon, was a French professor at the Washington Catholic University. It is where he met his wife, Dorothy Lehman, who became the dear Aunt Dolly of the whole Teilhard family. Dorothy was the daughter of Lord Hill Lehman, Abraham Lincoln's partner when he was a lawyer in Illinois. Later, he had become his man of confidence in the White House. This is how, from her childhood, Marguerite had shared the memories of her dear American aunt. At this time, Dorothy was working at editing her father's souvenirs on Lincoln. In the preface of her book, Marguerite tells us how she had had the feeling when doing her investigation on President Lincoln to follow in the footsteps of an old uncle. Marguerite had always dreamed of going to the United States. She could have worked and taught there. But so far, her family obligation had prevented her from doing so. Her research on Lincoln and lectures to be delivered at Rosemont College was the opportunity for her to go to the USA. Thus, in June 1939, she crossed the Atlantic on the Champlain, a great joy, all the more as she made the trip with Pierre. After a few months in France, he was to return to China via the United States and the Pacific. Marguerite was greeted by her aunt Odolly's cousins in Caldwell, 40 kilometers from New York. Wonderful guys for her. She was very happy to discover Pierre's familiar New York and to meet his friends at the museum. When they separated, each one going to their commitments, they couldn't imagine that they would have to wait more than 7 years to see each other again. Marguerite will have to cut her trip short. After the summer school at Rosemont College in Pennsylvania, after a pilgrimage in Lincoln's footsteps, she was in Chicago when she learned of the alarming news from Europe. She then decided to return to Washington to complete her research at the Congress Library and prepare for her return to France. Marguerite loved the United States. After the war, she will recount her journey in a marvelous little book, Prise de vue américaine. Snapshots of America. The story of the journey of a woman of letters, of her encounters, curious about everything, and who observe life with the eyes of a filmmaker. With Marie Bayon de la Tour, we used this book as a guide when we left for New York and Washington in the footsteps of Pierre and Marguerite. It was a great joy to share these moments with Tracy Higgins, Mary and Frank Frost. It has been also a great joy for me today to evoke with you Marguerite and her cousin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie-Joseph. That was fabulous. And I point out that she made the effort to make that video in English, which is no easy task. Thank you so much, Marie-Joseph. She may still be out there. A little shout out to Marie-Joseph. Thank you, Marie-Joseph. I don't know if we can actually spotlight her, if we can find her in those hundreds of people out there, but if we can, we can. If we can't, just thank you so much, Marie-Joseph.
Yes, yeah, good. Wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, there she is. We see her. Great. All right, Marie-Joseph. Great. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Be with us.
So thank you also. It's also such a joy to share this souvenir of Marguerite, and you can see how important she was for her cousin. And well, the two of them was well, she was her alter ego.
Yeah.
Really
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you.
Back to you, Sister Duffy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you once again to our presenters, to Cynthia Bourgeault for shedding a profound light, a profound and new light on Teilhard's sense of the person, a point so often misunderstood, and for helping us to appreciate ever more the treasure that we have in Teilhard and our responsibility to make his word known. As always, we have learned so much from you. And thank you to Lou Savory for writing such a helpful book and for sharing its flavor with us. In two of my reading groups, we've been working on it, and it certainly has made life easier for us. And thank you to Marie Bayon de la Tour for breaking open such an important topic and one that is so rarely discussed, Teilhard and the feminine. And to Marie-Joseph Conchon, listening to the details of Marguerite's life has been delightful. Thank you for coming today. It's so good to see you here on Zoom. And thank you for all of those for taking the time from your busy schedule to be with us. And also for those who have organized this meeting. We hope to see you all again soon. Please stay in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Just a reminder that we can be found, the American Teilhard Association, at teilharddechardin.org. We're also on Facebook, so be sure to look us up on there. And we just started an Instagram page. So those are the many ways that you can stay connected with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.